I'm Sarah Hall. I'm the director of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts, and I'm really happy to see all of you here. Whoops, we're having this echoing thing going on again. Sorry, sometimes I get the tech right and sometimes I don't. So thanks for joining us for this first Let's Talk Art of 2022. We took December off and it feels like we've been gone a long time, although when you're doing these Let's Talk Arts every month, it is kind of sometimes a challenge for us to always come up with new things to talk about. So we thought this year for 2022, it would be fun to start a new year looking at new things, meaning things that are new to us, recent acquisitions to the collection. As always, before we get started, I have a little museum business. First, I want to let everybody know it's the final weekend for Joshua Johnson, portraitist of early American Baltimore, and also Face to Face, which is portraits from our collection from the 18th and early 19th century. So do get into the museum to see those again, or for the first time if you haven't already been. We had a Joshua Johnson study day on Friday that was fabulous. We had sort of the most, the best Joshua Johnson scholars around, talking with our staff and talking with colleagues from other museums around the country. And we did record all of that. So in a few weeks, we will have that available on our YouTube page. You can have a Joshua Johnson playlist and you can watch your way through the day. I think it's about 5.5 hours of recordings in total, but they're really, really interesting and also fun. It was a great group. It was really relaxed. So while it's scholarly content, it's done in a really engaging way. So I recommend it. We also have one more week of our exhibition of the photography of Brassai, the secret Paris of the 1930s, vintage photographs by Brassai. That closes January 30th. It's very different from Joshua Johnson and Face to Face, but I do hope that you come in and take a look at that if you have the opportunity. And we're getting ready for our big look at regional art in the Cumberland Valley Artists and Photographers exhibition, which opens February 19th. And my last sort of business announcement is that we're about to launch one of our biggest annual fundraisers, Amazing Tablescapes. It is going to be online for the entire month of February. So if you go onto our website and look for the Amazing Tablescapes section, you can look at these amazing tablescapes, which are designed by local designers. We have, the way it works, the way we raise money is that you vote on the tables, the votes cost money, and the table that raises the most money wins the People's Choice Award. We also have a preview party on January 30th at 6 o'clock. If you're interested in participating in that, there's a $100 donation to get the private link. And then you also get a bag of party supplies, which is kind of fun. We had a lot of fun with this event last year. So I think if you're tired of online events, it's one that is not disappointing. And we're also going to Facebook live stream that preview party. So you get, if you do the donation, you get the party supplies, but you can also jump on Facebook Live and watch and get that extra advance notice and start doing your voting early. So with all of that museum business said, thanks for being with us. And I'm going to let Daniel start his screen share and we'll start talking about art.
Thank you for the introduction, Sarah. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight as we take you on a journey in the survey of some of our recent acquisitions for the collection. And we're going to be showcasing a lot of diversity tonight in this edition of Let's Talk Art. So we are going to go back to 2020 because typically in museum work, we consider a recent or new acquisition to fall within about 1 to 2 years. And so we're going to go back to actually just before the start of the pandemic here. And some of you may recognize these prints from an exhibition that I organized back in 2019 called The Blues and the Abstract Truth, Voices of African American Art. That was a landmark show for the exhibition because it was the first time that we presented a comprehensive group of works by African Americans some of whom are still living. It was an outstanding exhibition that drew lots of inspiration from blues and jazz music, hence the title, which came from an Oliver Nelson album. He was a jazz saxophonist of outstanding ability. And once the exhibition came to a close, we decided that it would be appropriate to make a purchase of these two African-American prints by artist Faith Ringgold. And some of you may know about Faith Ringgold. She was quite the trailblazer in the 1970s in terms of trying to push the textile art works that she created. She created very large pieces into the arena of what we would consider fine art. But in addition to creating quilting and weaving, sewn fabric works, she also is a great printmaker. And these two works are iconic in her entire body of work called Mama Could Sing and Papa Can Blow, which we acquired through the facilitation of Eileen Berger, owner of the Just Lookin' Gallery in Hagerstown. And she offers a number of prints by various Black artists. And these prints were on the cover of the catalog and also used for the promotion. And I'm really a big fan of them because they're just so joyful. I love the use of the blue color that's contrasted with the gold. You can also see here the use of the lettering as if the lyrics of the music are coming alive, where you see the Mama Can Sing here at the bottom, and then Papa Can Blow over here. And I should mention,
feel the music vibrating.
Yeah, exactly. You can. It's like everything is just really coming alive in the print. And I should mention that Sonny Rollins was actually the famous jazz tenor saxophonist. Was actually one of her friends when she was growing up. She became immersed in the cultural and intellectual context of the Harlem Renaissance, and you can see she was born. She's getting quite elderly, born 1930. So she really comes out of the tradition of Harlem Renaissance.
So we have one online comment that is, there's amazing movement and life in these, which is very true. Also, you mentioned her textile work. So this is part of the sort of feminist movement to have arts that are associated with women's work taken seriously. And I think you can kind of see the way the line, the sort of limited use of color here and the sort of use of line could be reminiscent of something that could be stitched or sewn.
I agree. It has that sort of tactile quality to it, and they're just jovial works. So these prints, which were partially a purchase and partially a gift, add to our holdings of African American art, which we are gradually trying to expand. Now here we have some, and Sarah can also you can jump in here whenever you like, because you had mentioned these in a Herald Mail column article that you had done about Fulvio Bianconi, is that right?
So we almost a year ago now, there was a piece in the Herald Mail that I wrote, just kind of highlighting some recent acquisitions. And this is lovely. Mike Emerson, who has moved and is no longer, he wasn't terribly local to us. He was in Baltimore, but he was a great friend of the museum, but he's now living on the West Coast. But you'll see a lot of acquisitions that were gifts of Mike Emerson tonight, but these were given in honor of my predecessor, Rebecca Massey Lane. And they're just really fun, really whimsical. These are explorations of the history of fashion in, Italian glass. And, you know that, yeah, those enlargements help a lot on these. They're just kind of fun. There's absolutely no reason for these to exist except for to delight us and to also show, what you can do with glass. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal.
I agree, and there's something about this that picks up on the tradition of the Italian comedy, or in Italian, the Commedia dell'arte.
Yeah, absolutely. Costumed characters that play particular roles and have, certain characteristics that were often used in art to represent sort of general human traits. Yeah, you can see that as well in these. It was I believe a collaboration, right? Fulvio Bianconi was collaborating with the glass producer Paolo Vanini, I believe.
That's exactly right. He collaborated with a number of makers, among them Venino Venini in Murano, which is near Venice.
Yes, Murano is really fun to visit. I mean, well, Venice, who wouldn't want to visit Venice? But yeah, it's something you have to do if you're ever in that area. And you know, once you feel differently about glass, I think, once you've been to Venice and seen Venetian glass.
It is amazing. The Glass Museum in Murano is just stunning. For those of you who have seen it.
They do have, this is another Mike Merson gift and another Bianconi. And I was going to say, they do have that mid-century feel, even though they're looking at sort of the history of fashion and costume. You know, they have that kind of mid-century sophistication, I think, about them.
They definitely do. And this one really is quite different from the Costume 500 figures that we were showing before. This one is something he called Bottle Vase. And where it comes up tonight, I will let you know if works are on view in the museum. This one is on view in our Kirstein Gallery, which has been recurated. So we encourage you to see that if you visit the museum.
It's the Kirstein Gallery, Daniel reinstalled it after the Bernini exhibition, and it is a much more, it's not so concerned with representing the canon or the things you might expect to see. It's really lively. There's more diversity in a number of ways, more women, more Black artists, more immigrants, and international artists. So it's fun. It's very colorful, very dynamic installation.
And here's another one from Mike Merson that he gave in honor of Rebecca Massulane in 2020. And I believe you also had discussed this one, Sarah, in your—
There's a quote I love about
article.
This, about Coralie Despo. Her dates are 1900 to 1982. You have them there. And the January 17th, 1926 edition of the New York Times had her marriage announcement in it. Okay, so she's not, it's still this women associated with men thing. But in her marriage announcement, they said this about her student work at the Maryland Institute, which was, she is one of the modernists whose pictures were banned recently by Hans Schuler, the director of the Institute. So this doesn't look terribly controversial to us, nor like something worth banning or putting quotes around modernist, which they had quotes around it in the article. But in fact, it was a sort of an early venture into modernism for a Maryland artist. She ended up becoming an art instructor. She was associated with the Snallygaster group of artists, which Daniel, having been here longer than I have, knows more about than I do. But Charles Walther, who we're going to see some of his work, I believe, also in this presentation, was her teacher. And he's really known for sort of bringing modernism to mica, which wasn't mica then, but.
Yes, and she was part of this group of artists, many of whom had come from Baltimore out further towards Hagerstown, but were specifically working in the Middletown Valley in Frederick County, very close to Washington.
I think if you were from Middletown, you could recognize this view. So it's recognizable places and topography, but she's really simplifying and working with sort of a rhythm of geometry and color.
She certainly is very broad planes of color and sort of a reduction or simplification of the forms across the canvas. And I noticed we have a question here. It was in relation, I believe, to one of the Fashion 500 figures. Are they solid, manipulated, and is the vase blown? The vase is blown, yes, to answer your question. I believe the figures are solid, manipulated. I don't know for certain, but that is my understanding. I know for sure though that the bottle is blown.
Yeah, we can look at them again. Yeah. cape on the woman maybe applied. I'm not, sort of layered on there. I'm not sure. These
Yeah.
are, I mean, we have a little gallery, the Reinhardt Gallery, which could be easy to miss, but has some fabulous glass in it. So don't miss it if you come to the museum. And that bottle vase is right out in the new Christine installation, as Daniel mentioned.
Yes, so we have a lot of diversity in terms of the works. Something else that you may recall for those of you who visited before the pandemic in 2019, and in this instance, we have a direct relationship with our collection. And this is, I'll come back in a moment, Norman Rockwell. Sorry, I have the wrong caption there. It's not by Thomas Sully. This is the Norman Rockwell called The Oculist. Many of you are familiar with it. It's one of our most beloved paintings in the collection. Originally a Saturday Evening Post cover. So when this came to us, when these posters of the Four Freedoms by Norman Rockwell were offered to us, it was a logical step to acquire them from the collection. They were first on loan. They were part of an exhibition in our Bear Gallery. And then later on, in discussions with the donors, that is the Albert Lee Case Family Trust there, we acquired all 4 large-scale posters. Now, a little bit about the background of these. In his address to U.S. Congress in January 1941, FDR conveyed to the country his vision of a post-war world that would be founded upon 4 fundamental human rights: the freedom of speech, religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, which is what the posters cover. And Norman Rockwell was really inspired by Roosevelt's speech. He wanted to do more for the war effort. And so he decided to illustrate the 4 freedoms as oil paintings. And you see them here paired together. We have the oils up here and then the oils down here in this instance, and that shows you the relationship to the posters. The works were really an outstanding success for Rockwell, and they were used by the Post and the U.S. Department of the Treasury to promote a joint campaign to sell war bonds and stamps. And then each of the works was reproduced as a Saturday Evening Post cover between February and March in 1943 consecutively.
So what's interesting to me is to see the sort of reverence in these. They're extremely, serious and, realistic illustrations. And then the Oculist is comic, right? It's got a lot of exaggeration and playfulness and humor in it. But there, you can feel the sincerity here and the reverence, because it's a time of war. There was an article in the Washington Post just at Thanksgiving, really, about and I'm going to not recollect, I'm going to bring something up that I'm not going to have perfect recall of, but it was really about his break in the, I think, early 60s or late 50s, his break from the Saturday Evening Post, because they were relatively conservative and that he didn't have the kind of freedom that he wanted to address social issues. So he leaves the Saturday Evening Post, and that's when he does the famous, some of his more famous images dealing with civil rights issues. So I think that's really interesting because, he is so thought of as this, quintessentially sort of everyman American artist, but he's there in step with the 20th century in terms of social and political issues of the day and what's really pressing on people. So to think of this in the 40s and then to think of the work he did in the 60s is really interesting.
They're really fascinating, and we don't have time to go into all the stories behind them, but I will mention that this gentleman here was somebody from Norman Rockwell's community in Vermont, and he used them as a model. And this was something that Rockwell often did with his work. And it was inspired by a town hall meeting that Rockwell went to in Vermont. So he would take events that he witnessed and sort of reinterpret them in his canvases. It's very interesting to learn about this because, in a way, especially for this gentleman who served as the model, it brings home that idea that you are relating to the actual condition of the person at the time. And that's really quite intriguing to note. Also, the juxtaposition of the faces of the people here in this one here for the freedom of worship is quite interesting. How he pairs their different facial expressions. And then the issue of domesticity, parents tucking in the children late at night, that they may be safe from what was going on with the war. Or never wanting to be hungry, here the serving of a turkey dinner at a typical American table in 1943. And I believe these people also, he knew them, the models personally. So he's certainly an intriguing figure in American art. And it leads into this kind of work that he did for the Post, but as Sarah mentioned, he broke from that in the 60s.
Right. And you do see, the humor, the exaggeration here, the feels like they're in central casting, like characters from the Andy Griffith Show or something like that.
Yes. And there's the Post cover.
But it is beloved. And it is that we've told this story many times about Bruce Etchison writing to purchase a painting, and our museum sort of being exactly where Norman Rockwell could envision his work finding a sympathetic audience. And so we were really fortunate to buy this painting directly from the artist in 1957, I think the painting's dated 56. And it's beloved, and we just had it conserved, and it looks fantastic. And it's also in the rehung Kirstein Gallery. So come in and admire it. You can even breathe on it now because it's protected. But you can't tell, it's this wonderful, amazing anti-reflective museum glass that doesn't interfere with your ability to see the painting at all, but protects it.
Yes, and it's makes a nice addition to the Kirstein Gallery installation. Now, we're going to be returning to these two donors later in the program, but we start here. It's got covered up. Gifts of Dr. John and Mrs. Sylvia O'Brien, who are collectors of old master prints and drawings. Our relationship with the O'Briens began in 2020, and at that time, they began to donate some American works on paper that relate to our collections. And that's another thing that Sarah and I are going to hit on this evening is when we make acquisitions, we try to look for parallels, relationships and conversations with things we have in our holdings. So for example, here, James Butterworth, the renowned marine painter, originally from England, but emigrated to America. When we were offered off Long Island, this drawing on the left, we saw it immediately had a great relationship to Puritan and Priscilla off Sandy Hook, New Jersey, that some of you may know. We had it out in the Smith Gallery for many years, and at the moment it's having a rest, but it's a wonderful painting. He really was adept at capturing the white caps on the waves, but also the vessels themselves. The wind blowing against the sails, and then look at that sky. You get that sense of the ideas underpinning his passion for the high seas and for boats in the drawing here, which has a great deal of spontaneity, really economical in terms of his use of lines.
Great sense of the wind in it.
Yes, and just a few marks hinting at the clouds in the sky. So at some point, it'd be wonderful if we could put these two out together, actually. Getting ideas here as we're going through some of these. The O'Brien gift from early 2020 also included a fabulous etching by Stefano De La Bella, who was a Central Italian engraver and draftsman. And this is just really beautiful. It shows a nobleman who stopped here and is talking to, looks like a squire or a page, and some kind of preparations are being made for the troops here on horseback. It looks like there's a horse that's been injured here on the left-hand side. And this is the great age of printmaking and the use of, in some cases, dry point etching. This one might be a dry point, but it's really quite wonderful.
So he's working around the same time as Jacques Callot, probably, right?
That's right.
Mhm.
This where etching is really beginning to take off in the mid 1600s. And some of you may remember when Sarah and I were talking about this in relation to the Dutch Golden Age exhibition in the fall of 2020. We had that show from the Reading Public Museum.
Developing all sorts of different kinds of effects that they can use in etching to conjure atmosphere. Yeah.
We also received the first group of portraits from the renowned Italian portraitist who was connected to Gian Lorenzo Bernini, Ottavio Leoni. And this is one of the papal secretaries named Giovanni Ciampoli. He has just a tremendous sense of immediacy in the way he captures these people from the 1620s. He did a whole series of these. If you stop by the museum in the next week or two, these may still be up there in the corridor near the elevator of the museum.
We're getting ready to rehang that corridor with some French things. But yeah, you can still see the Baroque things for a little while longer.
Yep. Or this guy, Paulos Cunhas, which again, look at how he captures the guy's hair, the subtle wrinkles in his forehead, the folds on his cloak here, really outstanding.
I do kind of want to go like this and smooth his hair down.
Yeah, it's really quite disheveled, actually. Also part of the O'Brien gift. This is on view in the museum in the face-to-face exhibition that I curated next to the Joshua Johnson exhibition in the Grow Gallery by Peter Pelham, a major figure in bringing mezzotint printmaking to the United States, particularly the colonies. This is an actress named Susanna Sun Weaver who
look at her dress. So
isn't
you
that
can
fabulous?
see that it's satin, right? So conveying the fact that it's satin in a print medium is pretty remarkable. And mezzotint was incredibly popular in the early 18th century as the preferred method of reproducing paintings, because you could get these wonderful painterly tonal variations. It's you can tell it's one of the things I like talking about. I worked with a contemporary mezzotint artist a few years ago, so was kind of immersed in the world of mezzotint. You take your plate, your metal plate, and you go over it with a tool called a rocker, and you kick up little metal burrs all over the plate. And it's really labor intensive. You do it, up and down and across and diagonally until you have this tiny little network of raised metal burrs. And then you create the image from dark to light by flattening the areas, and it just gives so much more tonal control. And it became the way that a lot of portfolios of beautiful women of the period and famous paintings were reproduced, because you could just get painterly effects so much better. And she is lovely.
It's a stunning print, and also look at the reflection of the light off of the folds in the fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Just amazing. Part of the gift also included a set of etchings here by Bartlomeo Pinelli, an early 19th century neoclassical artist. And these are about different episodes from ancient Roman history. This is just one example showing Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus from the early days of ancient Rome. I believe this goes back to the period of the kings, so monarchical Rome, roughly 8th to 7th centuries BCE.
I'm ready to relinquish something to assume power.
Exactly.
It makes it sound like so easy.
And we switch gears here to move to some other donations. Speaking to the diversity, 2020 also brought us some great highlights that relate to the mascot of our museum, the Diana of the Chase. And in this instance, Anna Hyde Huntington, her descending jaguar, shown on the left, done in about 1906. And here on the right, we have two works that are already in the collection. Many of you know the Diana of the Chase. That was a gift of the artist in honor of the museum's 10th anniversary in 1941. And then this one was actually given in 1937. And it had I believe it was a gift of the artist as well. So it actually preceded it. But she really had a knack for capturing the movements, the habitats of animals, and she was particularly fascinated by them.
And it's still, she captures it, but she maintains a really elegant, sinuous line. That's this wonderful sort of naturalism meets elegance.
Yes, and it's this sort of desire to, capture the movement, the motion, and also in some cases the interactions between animals, if you look at more of her work. And in some cases between humans and animals, as in the Diana chase, we see here how the hunting dog of Diana reacts to, looks up at the goddess, which of course is one of the amazing things about this work that activates the space around the sculpture when you see it in person. And of course, it always is on view at the museum in our Rotunda gallery.
I will, true confessions, we have Washington County Goes Purple every year, which is about opioid awareness and is a wonderful and important thing. But we usually drape Diana with some purple and do some other things at the museum to show our community support. But, her line is so perfect that I can't wait until we take the purple scarf off of her, because she just is meant to be the way she is. It's just beautiful.
She certainly is. And then this portrayal of the jaguar is also really interesting. Look at how it reaches down with its paw. It's on top of what looks like it's a rock, but it could be a tree trunk. And this sort of angularity of the dexterity of this big cat as it reaches down with its paw. It's really well done. And it's not that big either. Here in the photos, you may think it's large. It's just about this high. And beautiful patina, that is the surface of the bronze. And the same grace is also present in Victory Horse, which we had on view during the exhibition of women artists in 2020. Now, something very different from Anna Hyde Huntington's work that came in from the same donor, Jacqueline Alexander, in 2020, Sweetgrass Baskets by African-American artist Mariette Jackson, who was a 2008 recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant and is active in Charleston, South Carolina, which is where these sweetgrass baskets are made. It's really steeped in this tradition. They're so gracefully and beautifully made. See here you have, isn't that beautiful? The way that the combination of the pine needles, bulrush, and then palmetto, and of course the sweetgrass to make this wonderful pattern.
Daniel and I sometimes talk, museums have collecting plans and collections management policies. And so as you're looking at these, you're seeing a huge diversity of objects, but we are inspired by our founders, the Singers, who were eclectic collectors. They were interested in all sorts of different cultures and objects, and surrounded themselves, as many people of that time period did, with objects that demonstrated their sophistication, their worldliness, their travels. I mean, we all like to bring things back from trips, but depending on our means, we can collect more ambitiously or less ambitiously. So we actually find it pretty inspiring to use eclectic inspiration in helping to develop the collection and being able to tell a lot of different stories through what we have.
We certainly do, and you're going to see tonight more of this kind of eclecticism as we look at different ethnographic pieces as well as world cultures. And in terms of coming back to the Singers, here's an example of a work that was a gift that also came with the gift of conservation by a very obscure artist named Frank Morse Rummel, who was British American but born in Germany. And Morse Rummel was a friend of William Singer. As some of you may know, the Singers, Anna and William, lived abroad. And particularly the canvas I'm showing you on the right, called An Old Viking, a great title for this portrait almost of a tree in Norway.
I could imagine, William Singer personifying that very the landscape that requires a kind of stoicism to appreciate its beauty. Not surprising that he would personify the tree.
Exactly. I was thinking about that title today, and it's supposed to be this kind of stalwart, steadfast, sort of anthropomorphized figure in a certain way, him using that title, don't you think?
Oh yeah, and enduring, potentially having, it doesn't look like a terribly huge tree, but it's got to be very hardy to survive those conditions, and doing better than the men. Probably a lot of people have come and gone during that tree's lifetime.
Exactly. And this fellow here in the Frank Morse Rummel painting, just simply titled Figure Walking on Snow, which was a gift of Bob and Suzanne Tenenbaum in 2020, shows this passion for this interest in creating winter scenes, particularly in this case, the relationship of human to the surrounding landscape. And you can see here that in these photos, the difference that it made to have it professionally conserved. Look at the grime that was over it. And once it was cleaned, it really started to show much better. And then when it's totally clean, that's the work on the left. The other reason we acquired Morse Rummel, not only the relationship with William Singer, but we also have several Morse Rummels that are in the collection that relate to the Norse mythology, particularly the punishment of Loki that you see here on the right. And certainly with the films in our popular culture.
Probably more young people understand that than I do.
Yes, Loki is certainly in the popular consciousness now in terms of the movie industry. But we have a set of these about various heroes and deities that we received from the Singers in 1937. Very briefly, the Norse mythological watercolors, we believe, were studies for a huge mural cycle that this guy Morse Rummel did, potentially for some sort of a civic building in Norway. But it hasn't been proven definitively he did that. So in this case, it makes a nice dialogue with what we have. Moving on from the Morse Rummel, we acquired a very interesting pairing of the woodcut by Lowell Nesbitt, a renowned pop artist, and the actual printing block, which is really
interesting. He's such a great character to talk about. He's a Maryland artist. He has the classic story of, I think he worked at the Phillips collection as a security guard, sort of immersed himself in art. I think one of his paintings was sent to space too. So known for these larger than life botanical paintings, but this is, I think, a bit earlier. I love that he's combining abstraction here with the organic. It's more interesting to me in some ways than his straightforward botanical studies of flowers.
I agree.
Really quite a character too. I mean, he had this amazing studio in New York, and he threw great parties, and was known for his entertaining as well. And the rose is now on view in the Kirstein Gallery as well. So we're kind of doing a commercial for the rehang of the Kirstein Gallery here tonight.
We certainly are. And look at how different rose is from this one here, Elliptical Shape. It's so different. And it shows how he really started to move into creating these hyper realistic canvases at this point in his career in 1965. So he had a pretty long career, relatively.
Yes. I'm forgetting, I think there was somebody in particular who he had a conversation with that sort of steers him towards focusing on these this floral imagery that really, he was quite hot for a while.
He certainly was. I think it might have been with one of the pop artists. I don't want to say the wrong artist. Mm-hmm. It might have been Robert Indiana or Jasper Johns, I believe. But I was one of those artists. Now, quite different acquisition, and again, going to the worldly vision of the Singers that we continue today, we acquired a Kachina, which is a figure prominent in the Southwest First Nation cultures that are typically carved from cottonwood root, and they're used to instruct young girls and new brides, about immortal beings that bring rain, control the forces of the natural world and society, and also act as messengers or intermediaries between humans and the spirit world. So that's the function of these. They're very simply painted. And when these were offered to us, we saw an excellent opportunity to bring them into conversation with one that we have already on the right that was acquired in 1983. And periodically, we do rotate our Native American works in our Fulton Gallery.
Right. I was going to say, before I started at the museum, you had reinstalled the Fulton Gallery to be a sort of fun immersion in different cultures. And also in our other, and I think Smith Gallery, we have some representation. It's something, I mean, it sounds almost stupid or ham-fisted to say this in 2022, but I think maybe it was 15 or 20 years ago that museums started realizing, you know, that American art included Native American art, that you should not be segregating Native American art to ethnographic displays, but that they belong in the galleries where your American art is. And I'm happy to say that we do that. We have integrated, you know, different cultural representations of diversity of American artists.
Yes, and that's what we are trying to continue to do. We also acquired a bois plank mask from Burkina Faso.
And I'm just going to interject, it's huge, okay? So look at the dimensions on this. If you've never seen a bois mask, it's very large.
It is massive, and it is not on view at the moment, but at some point in the future could be. But in order to put this out, we have to get a case that can accommodate it. A dedicated volunteer, Royce Faddis, kindly donated it to us. And it really makes a nice addition to the collection. Bois masks, very briefly, were in some cases still used in performances to embody nature, ancestor spirits, as well as at funerals that honor the dead and accompany the deceased souls into the afterlife. So this would be worn by an individual in such a ceremony. The colors also have symbolism between life and death, between the white and black checkers there. And it makes a great addition to one that we already have, the Bamana dance headdress, or also known as female chiwara, of the Mande people from Mali in Africa that we acquired in the 1980s from Dr. Wade Russell, who is one of the founding donors of our African collections. And this is an antelope headdress or headgear. It's quite large as well. It's huge, as Sarah was saying. These are really big. And for the person wearing them, it's a tremendous amount of weight to have on your head if you're in one of those ceremonies. But the Museum of Fine Arts does have a small collection of African art. Some of it is on view, and we will return to that a little later. Moving out of 2021, we come into 2020, we come into 2021. And we go back to some really great gifts from Mike Emerson. And here's one that is in the Kirstein Gallery right now.
Yeah, and that's Charles Walther, who I mentioned before as Coralie Despo's teacher, bringing modernism to Maryland.
And
it's disconcerting. See the frame? If you walk in the gallery, it can give you a little sense of, like, you know, the floor is tilting or something.
And when I originally saw this, there's sort of these half moons, but I amusingly joked with my colleagues, and I think I've said it to you, Sarah, they look like little Pac-Mans. They're like kind of like munching or something. Mm-hmm. This is a custom design frame by a Baltimore frame maker named Daniel England. So it's not only the painting, it's also the frame as a work of art too. Simply titled Abstract 1924, and it looks sort of like a lizard or a fox that's
like a praying mantis-y kind of creature. I don't know.
Soaring into space. And this looks like the moon or a lamp, and this looks like a bridge, and a beam of light is shining out on this creature.
It's kind of funny because there's aspects of the technique that make you think of precisionism, you know, looking at industry or urban views with this like incredible crispness, but it's also weirdly surreal, and it's a unique painting.
It certainly is. And then you could see below there look like some skyscrapers. So it's soaring up into the sky. Really neat. As part of this gift from Mike Merson in honor of their grandson, we also received a Keith Morrow Martin, another Maryland artist. His work is on view in the museum. This one we don't have it on view at the moment, but it's really a great acquisition because most of the Morrow Martin works we have are from later in his career, such as the wheels or the harpies on the right, which refer to these demonic creatures from Greco-Roman mythology.
Yeah, I'm scared of harpies.
Me too. Not so scared of the interior with Baroque Agure that he did in 1934 when he was in Berlin. Certainly a tough time to be visiting Berlin because the Nazis have just risen to power. This work is somewhat reminiscent of Picasso, and it's quite a large pastel, and it's beautifully done, quite different from the others that we have. Martin, for many years, worked at the Maryland Institute College of Art and was a Maryland artist. And Mike Merson specialized in his collecting in Baltimore painters, such as Charles Walther. He gave us the Refractory from 1934. We have here on the right, you were talking about precisionism, Sarah. Mary Helen Krissinger, this work was on view when I arrived at the museum about in 2017. The precisionism. And you can kind of see that there, especially with Krissinger, but there is this element that also relates to Walther's work in terms of these very straight lines and the use of the architecture, very planar forms. Or Walter Bohannon, who painted in the Middletown Valley, some of these industrial scenes, some of them identifiable. Very different, as Mike Merson collected Baltimore artists, modernists. He also is passionate about art glass, particularly from the Art Nouveau period. Like this
We
one.
did see the Bianconi figures were a gift of Mike Merson as well. This just dazzled us when he brought it in. It was kind of a surprise, right? I went into the library, and it was the first time I met Mike, and he unpacked this, and it's incredible jewel toned colors and this wonderful, Art Nouveau feeling of the shape of the glass and the way the natural motifs are integrated in. It's just really stunning.
It's beautiful. It almost has the qualities of a stained glass work. So at some point that will be going out. Among the other gifts included people like Howard Norton Cook, who was an artist who eventually ended up in New Mexico. This was before he went there, though. He's looking at industrial scenes for inspiration. Look at those huge pipes that are in the foreground here. Fabulous, very bold print in terms of the use of contrast between black and white and the dynamism of the city itself. Or Shelby Shackleford, who began her career in Maryland, but would eventually relocate to Provincetown, Massachusetts. And we noted when this work came how much it resembled George O'Keeffe's paintings, like Sun, Water, Main on the right. Look at those big planes of color. The seascape really has this undulating effect that you see in terms of the use of the turquoises and the blues in the O'Keeffe there on the right. I think that Shackleford was indeed influenced by her in some way.
You have done some research on her, and I think she was fairly successful. She was showing pretty regularly, wasn't she, Shelby Shackleford?
She certainly was. For many years, she taught at the St. Timothy's School in Stevenson, Maryland, which is still around, as I recall. And then she was exhibiting at the Baltimore Museum of Art. So she did have her work very well represented. She also was an illustrator, doing works children's books, as well as illustrating a scientific periodicals. So she really got around, and she was also involved, I think, with, for at least a period, with the WPA, as many of these artists were. Now, very different from that, we also collect ceramic art at the museum of varying kinds, both historic and contemporary, such as formerly Frederick-based Maryland artist Joyce Michelle.
I'll point out scale. We talked about scale with the African items. Well, these are really tiny. So these are like little precious things. Very interesting, I think, her work.
They kind of try to create this element of a primordial existence in terms of the colors. They almost have this geological type of appearance.
Or you might just dig them up in your backyard.
Kind of, yeah. And some of them have titles from a residency that she had in Denmark. That's what these titles refer to, as she was on a ceramic art fellowship over there at one point in her career. And she studied with a number of important people, and was associated with people like Mary Bowron, who for many years taught at and founded the ceramics program at Hood College in Frederick. So very nice acquisitions for that part of our collection. Totally different from that. How do we make a transition from
I'm not sure whether to tell this story truthfully or not, but every year we have an annual treasure sale, and people donate things for us to sell to benefit the museum. And I stopped by, I'd only been here for a couple of months, and I stopped by where they were organizing the materials, and Royce, our volunteer, said, you might want to look at some of the things over there. And I immediately saw what are often called Mariette mats, the beautiful blue mats for drawings that drawing collectors sometimes use, named after a famous collector, J.P. Mariette. And I pulled these two out. They're not in great condition, but they're truly beautiful drawings. And I brought them back to the museum and said, Daniel, take a look at these. And now they are part of the collection.
And I indeed did. I actually shared these two with a colleague at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and they believed that they were by Jean-Baptiste Pillemont, signed, and this one from the circle of the renowned hunting painter to Louis XV, Jean-Baptiste Dudry, probably one of his close followers. And both of them are really beautifully done. We don't have many French drawings in the collection. That's changing a bit. And we'll get to that towards the end of the program. But see how you have these shepherdesses who are here in this scene of ruins. In the 18th century, there's this fascination with ruins and with looking at the picturesque landscape, which sort of is meandering, in which human creations, in this case architecture, are retaken, they're conquered by nature. And within that, you have the birth of the Romantic movement. But it's just wonderful in terms of the textures of this composition, both the architecture, the figures, and the landscape. Or the interaction between the animals in Fox attacking a rooster here, which is very dramatic, as it's sunk its teeth into the bird. And then this other one reacts over here with the chicks running away. Really outstanding.
Idealized landscape with the little castle in the background.
Yes. Now, acquisitions can be defined in many ways. Sometimes it's about us actually re-examining pieces in the collection and thinking about if they have a status that they are temporary, or if they were for some reason removed by a predecessor for further research. This one that we're looking at here, done by an artist who was a follower of Rembrandt, we decided to bring it back into the collection. And it's attributed to Jan van Vliet, who was an artist who was active at the time of Rembrandt. And this is an outstanding self-portrait done after the artist. We had had it in the collection for many years. but it could be that one of our predecessors was doing research on it, and it found its way into storage and not looked at for quite some time. But I examined it further and found that it had a Strasbourg lily watermark, which tells us that it is very likely from the 17th century. It's a kind of paper that was produced at that time in the 1600s. Similar markings can be found on prints in the Frick collection in New York City. And we have that here, the Strasbourg lily and the crown. It's the same kind of woven paper. And then, sure enough, I did some more research and found that the print was in the collection of the British Museum in London. So this was a really neat discovery. The one in the British Museum, the shading on Rembrandt's cloak here is darker than ours. And you can see it's almost blackened, whereas the version we have, there's more contrast between the light and the dark areas.
So I'm going to tell a story. Museums have had a move to, talking about trends in museums. I've worked in museums for close to 30 years now. So I've seen the profession change a little, and transparency and talking about the way we care for our collections has become, much more commonplace. And so I went to a conference once where someone presented about an exhibition they did, where they simply did a random, we all have collections databases. They did a random pull from the database, and they just showed those objects that had been randomly pulled through this kind of inventory checking system. And if they couldn't find something, because sometimes something might be accessioned in 1923 and put on a shelf, and nobody ever looks for the object again until it gets pulled out of the database and they realize they can't find it. And so they did this, I think it was 1% of their collection. They randomly selected and showed. And if they couldn't find something, they put a label up and explained, we have a record for this object and we couldn't find it. And so I was always fascinated by that, and the idea of creating meaning from a group of objects that aren't necessarily meant to be shown together, and what you can tell people about the way museums work. There's something we could maybe think about doing someday, but these, we have collections committee meetings, and as we've had Daniel on staff for several years now, he's going through and looking at some of these things that were removed from the collection but not ever disposed of. They're still in our custody, and thankfully it's giving him an opportunity to examine them and think again about some of our predecessors' choices that maybe we don't necessarily agree with. And institutions do change. So I told Daniel earlier when we were talking, we could recommend that you watch, if you're interested, the prior Let's Talk Art we did, I think in September, on the 90th anniversary of the museum. It's on our YouTube page. And we do talk a little bit about how different directors come and have different institutional priorities. And of course, society has different priorities that museums are trying to be in harmony with, and trying to, different missions and goals they're trying to accomplish. But one of the things we've talked about in terms of this eclectic collection is that we have the Schreiber Gallery, if you've been to the museum, and it is hung with old masters. And that's essentially the only place we display old masters. And it's kind of been a static group of works without a lot of support in the collection for doing rotations or for offering deeper interpretation. And we really want that collection to be more than a prop for that room. we want to develop that collection and have some depth to it, and take it seriously. It's not just about making the Schreiber Gallery look impressive.
Indeed, and I've really taken an interest in the old masters since arriving at the museum, and I try to shed new light on them, such as this print that we have in the collection.
So we do have somebody with a raised hand, and
yes.
I'm not sure, Faye, if you want to put something in the chat, or if you would like to talk, or maybe it was an accidentally raised hand.
Dan Weil raised his hand, I see.
Faye's hand was up. Well, if you want to put something in the chat, or if you want to speak, you can say that in the chat too, and we can give you audio if you'd like. if you do have a question. But in the meantime, we'll think maybe that was an accidental hand raise. I don't know.
So I see that we have reached 7 o'clock. So what I'm going to do is hit on some highlights, Sarah. So
Okay.
there looks like we've got a chat there.
We want a request for covering more discovered works or undiscovered works found in collection, and good. Sometimes you find things in your collection and it's not, and you don't want them in your collection. It's great if you find it in your collection and you want it. Yeah, no, that's fun. We're always looking for other topics.
So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead, and we'll talk about how we were trying to build our photography collection at the museum, which came to us recently from a donor, Kristen Loken, of photographs by Joseph Franklin. And Joseph Franklin is not a household name. He was a member of the Marine Corps in World War II. He did various photography projects for them. He also did filming. Joe Franklin, after that, he enrolled at the Arts Center School of Los Angeles, and he also made a living writing short stories, and he went on to work for a period in motion pictures, and actually wrote some of the original scripts for the television show Lassie.
That's right, I'd forgotten that.
Yes, he did that when the show first started. And there's Joe Franklin there on the left, and a poster that we have as part of the supporting material. And we received from Kristen 20 photos, silver gelatin prints from later in Joe's career, when he traveled with his family to Africa and other parts of the world. And he published a book of these works called African, a photographic essay of Black women of Ghana and Nigeria. And it's really interesting to look at this. You read the text, and you get his insights into what it was like to live amongst these people. And he really enjoyed photographing them and also talking with them and getting to learn about their culture a lot too. And some of them are really striking. They capture the people in their daily lives, in some cases in ceremonies, and in village meetings. And they make a nice connection to some of the works we have in the collection, such as our works over here from Nigeria of Ibeji, or twin figures, that are actually on view in the museum. They're in the Fulton Gallery right now. So when this donation was proposed to us, Sarah and I talked about it, and I said it makes a nice connection to some of our African art. We do have some Nigerian and Ghanaian art, but they're beautifully taken.
Yeah, and as well as helping us develop a photography collection. And of course, there were many, I think even photographers like Irving Penn, who did a lot of sort of cultural photographs. That we look at the work a little differently now, because we think about the sort of white male photographer going in and sort of documenting and observing other lives, but it was really a sort of part and parcel of that time period. And I think Joe Franklin's work is really, dignified and beautiful.
I think so too. And there's a wide range of compositions that he did here. When we made our selections, we wanted to balance it to show not only the works from Africa, but also when he traveled abroad. He did some beautiful things with texture and form, such as these fountains called Cityscapes series from the 70s and 80s. He traveled to Norway and captured the beauty of the water in various points in the fjords and other places, which of course is a great connection to William and Anna Singer, because Norway they were passionate about Norway and lived there. He also spent a great deal of time in nature. This is a stunning work that he had at a show at Princeton in the 1970s and 80s. And we should mention that also many photographers and artists don't always have the same representation. And to be able to have Joe Franklin, who was a very talented photographer in our collection, is really outstanding. And Sarah had mentioned sort of this connection in terms of absorbing influence. I think that in this one on the left of the tree trunks, he was certainly looking at Edward Weston here in this composition called Cypress, very much influenced. Now, very different from Joe Franklin is a photographer who mixes media, and his name is Dennis Farber, who enjoyed a 40-year career and was a really outstanding artist in terms of combining photography and painting. He was originally trained as a painter. And this is
you can't appreciate these, really shown in this way. I mean, they're really beautiful objects. They're complex objects. I think they're really poetic and evocative. He's a really interesting artist. And yeah, the work doesn't represent terribly well in a PowerPoint. But
no, what he's done here is he's actually painted onto the photograph itself and created a mixed media composition of Oaxaca, Mexico, where he spent some time in the 1980s. But his Polaroids really are what he's best known for. And the Dennis Farber Trust made a gift of several of these photos to our collection.
Right. He did a couple of, they had the large format Polaroid camera, right, in Boston, and they would invite contemporary artists to do projects working with that camera. And he did that, I think, a couple of times, Dennis Farber. So this is really interesting work.
It's fascinating. And a lot of it deals with his memories from childhood and adolescence. He did have periods in his life where he went through depression. And according to a friend of his, one of the ways he coped with that was looking back at his memories and trying to sort of find healing through the creation of these photographs, where he's inspired by daguerreotypes in early photography, as you can see, but he's working in a Polaroid format. As the medium.
Well, that's the sort of bittersweetness of photography, right? That you're looking at a moment, but it could be a moment long past.
Yes. They're really fascinating how he does these multiple layered images. And they are pretty large format. He even shows on the prints, the ink here. See, it's coming off of onto the edges of the work. So. And we will conclude with just a couple of selections from a recent gift from the O'Briens. And Sarah had an opportunity to feature this beautiful Sassoferrato study for Madonna and Child in the Borghese Gallery in Rome, a major acquisition for the museum, in her Herald Mail article.
It was a piece that came out on December 26th, so it seemed really, although I think there were 36 different works on paper in this most recent gift from the O'Briens, it really made sense to focus on the Sassoferrato. And it's so fun to say his name. So
it's a great name.
So I've been telling everyone. So we actually had, those of you who may remember Bernini and the Roman Baroque, the masterpieces from the Palazzo Chigi and Riccia, there she is. St. Lucy was kind of a mascot of that show. We used her in a lot of our marketing material, and that's a Sassoferrato. And he's, he's a Baroque artist, but he is looking back at the Renaissance. He's really looking back at, particularly at Raphael, but this kind of smooth classicism and this kind of stillness, these beautiful paintings full of tenderness, but also, this kind of, unlike the dynamism and theatricality that one associates with the Baroque, Sassoferrato is about this pristine finish and this kind of stillness. And he's looking, his Madonnas really are looking at Raphael, and Raphael creating these works in which the relationship between Mary and the child is given a sort of new naturalism, and that becomes sort of a very popular motif for Sassoferrato. He does a number of them, and you can see that the Macintosh Madonna there on the left is the famous Raphael that he is working after Sassoferrato in the beautiful drawing that we have, which is squared. So if you look at that, it is has a grid drawn on it so that he could enlarge it to make a painting. And in fact, Sassoferrato sometimes, did multiple versions. He worked to a market for people who wanted these domestic devotional works. And so he might make, a number of versions of a composition in his studio. So if something is squared for transfer, there could have been more than one painting made after it. But Daniel was able to identify the painting in the collection of the Borghese Gallery in Rome that is made after our drawing. I think it's just so, I love the fact that you can sort of feel the weight of the baby, the way the baby is leaning into Mary, really, really quite beautiful. Daniel, you brought it in and called me into the library to look at it, and I I stole your thunder by choosing it for the Herald Mail article. So if there's anything else you want to say about it, I mean, I love his fantastic self-portrait there. Really, you can see just, you can understand why although he's looking backwards in a sense, I think there was a little bit of a renaissance of interest in his work in the late 19th century, because there's this accessibility about it. There's this ability to connect to the figures. Really lovely.
Just stunning. I mean, I'm amazed by the tender interaction between the mother and child. I mean, that really struck me. There's this gracefulness, suppleness of the clothing, of the skin, certainly, as you mentioned, connected to Raphael, but it's just this wonderful bond between the mother and child. And to be able
so soft, right? The drawing has this, it has all the detail and, like I said, sense of weight, but there's this just overall sort of soft feeling about it that really adds to that sense of tenderness. I mean, I prefer the drawing to the painting.
Yes, but I agree in many ways. I like the way her eyes are looking down here, and how Christ also, his expression seems somehow to me more naturalistic.
It is more natural, I believe. That pristine finish of Sassoferrato's maybe creates a little sense of artificiality in the painting that is not there in the drawing.
Agreed. So to wrap up, just to show you a couple of highlights. We could probably do at some point in the future a separate program on the O'Brien donation in and of itself, because there is so much in this, and very likely more to come. The O'Briens are helping us to build up our collection of old master prints and drawings, particularly Italian and French, but also others as well. One other highlight, just to show you, that came as part of this year-end gift, is a study by the Neapolitan artist Francesco Solimena for the triumph of Aurora, goddess of the dawn, who brings every new day, gliding across the heavens with her chariot. And this is a beautiful and highly detailed, actually, ink and wash drawing on paper. And this one is really quite stunning. I'm still doing research on it in terms of seeing what's been published on it. It is really outstanding. Look at the contrast between light and dark, between the background and this drape here that comes out into the viewer space.
I was talking to Daniel earlier about the sort of technical virtuosity required, that, using drawing as a tool for a finished fresco or oil painting or whatever the commission might be, yet the drawing itself is so accomplished. It's really, really phenomenal. And you can blame Daniel for the fact that we always run long, because he just loves to do a long PowerPoint and lots of good images.
Yes.
We've had a lot of fun tonight, I think.
Yes. So this gives you an idea of some of the works that we have brought in the last couple of years. But I think we will stop there. If there are any more questions, feel free to ask them.
We have one very nice comment saying that this real-time presentation about recent acquisitions provided a vitality of the museum at work, and that we should keep up the good work. Particularly, this particular person appreciated the glass and the baskets being part of our permanent collection. So that's really nice to see that, the community is receptive to what we're doing as well. I'm happy to see that. I don't see any questions coming in. I'm trying to monitor chat on Facebook as well, and I don't see any questions there. I know we've talked a long time, so I will just wrap up with a couple little announcements. In February, we have a couple of things going on that may supplant Let's Talk Art. We have the Cumberland Valley Artists and Photographers exhibition opening February 19th, and on that Saturday, I think it's either at 2 or 3 p.m. we're planning a conversation with the award-winning artists and the jurors for that show. So we did that last year, and it was a really interesting conversation for a Saturday afternoon. And then really exciting, if you remember, we didn't touch upon it at all tonight, but we have a contemporary art installation right now called War and Pieces. It's by Bouke de Vries, a Dutch artist who's based in London. And he is going to zoom us into his studio on February 26th and give us a tour of his London studio. I think that's at 3 o'clock on February 26th. So if you want more information about that, you can reach out to us. I think that it's on our calendar on the website. If it's not, it will be soon. But that should be really, really interesting. So the last thing I am going to say is that your support helps us do our work. So if you are able to join the museum or donate to the museum, you help us with our 90-year tradition of free admission, and most of our educational programs are free or very low cost. You know, we do Let's Talk Art generally monthly. We're thinking about moving to every other month because we have a lot of fun with it, but it does take time for us. And there's some other new programs that I want us to introduce, and particularly with the new surge in the pandemic, we want to come up with some other sort of creative ways of connecting people to our collections online, thinking about a sort of art social hour for museum members where we just get together and talk about an individual work of art. So that's in the works, and we're happy to take ideas for topics for Let's Talk Art or for other kinds of programs that we can do. So this was a long evening for everybody, and thank you so much for bearing with us, and have a great night.
Thank you very much.